Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all on this channel. I'm really honored to be presenting this, opening this PAW session for 220. As Jan said, it's been a concern for me to try and find some interactive systems because I'm pretty sure that most of you who use computer music softwares and video softwares, not only, but also hardware stuff, are always in this kind of situation where they have to change protocols to send any information from one place to the other. So this is a kind of hassle. It's always been. So my main question was, what kind of protocol is the easiest one? So these past years, we all know MIDI as a protocol because this is one of the most famous ones since the 80s. And the MIDI system is really one of the most reliable ones because all of you know that the MIDI is something that is written in the hardcore of all your OS computers, your OSs of all your computers. And along the years, MIDI has changed, and one of the most famous ones now is called MPE for a multi-channel and complex MIDI system, which I won't be talking about because I don't have any of those to show you right now. I would have if lockdown in France had, cut us from the studio, so I'm at home. So I won't be showing you any hardware system neither, even though I have a Eurorack system, which is really nice. So I will be talking about Eurorack systems, but particularly in VCV rack. So coming back to the protocols, one of the major problems that I had along these years is trying to send information between one software like VCV rack, another software like Max MSP, or it could be Pure Data, Ableton Live, because Ableton Live, which is a really very famous DAW now, but I use it mainly because you can write your Max patches and put them inside Ableton Live. Well, there are some issues there, but still, let's not talk about that part. And I wanted to talk about also video because I'm going to show you how to interact with the video system too. So the first thing first, I'm going to show you, for those who are not familiar with VCV rack, let me show you, present a screen, and let me show you this first. So you should be seeing shortly the main page by VCV rack. So VCV rack is, as it says on the main page, is a Eurorack simulator. So what is Eurorack? It's actually modules that have functions, just like in programming, general programming, but this is older than computer programming. This is where Max MSP probably got its first ideas from. And VCV rack is sort of an emulation of all types of modules. The nice thing about it is that it's open source. There's a very big community of people working on it. And it's actually easily hackable and easily usable to produce music and video. You'll see some people doing that too. So first thing to do is probably to install VCV rack and create an account. So I'm already logged in. And well, Rack doesn't have all the modules that I'm going to show you, so you will need to install a library, some libraries, in fact, that you can find in the library section. There's a library here. You can have a look at that. And so the first thing that I will be using is a library by Trowasoft. So Trowasoft is a really nice library using OSC, Open Sound Control, that was supposed by many people said that Open Sound Control was supposed to be the new MIDI. So it's a network protocol to send information from one place to the other. Well, in my humble opinion, OSC never achieved that properly, because OSC, it's not dead yet, but it's a bit complicated to use. It's not as intuitive as MIDI would be, though MIDI also has its hassle. MPE, which is the MIDI extension now, especially since Ableton is going to implement MPE within its software. Max MSP has also done that. It's going to be probably one of the next steps in controlling your softwares. Well, TrowaSoft implemented OSC within VCV Rack. So you will need to install this library. Then the other one is one of my favorites, is Audible Instruments. Those who use Eurorack are actually probably familiar with Mutable Instruments. It's the open source part, and probably the most intelligent, to my sense, Eurorack system ever made, because Émilie Gillet has been developing these modules in hardware, all open source and open hardware. So you will find all over the world different types of different variations of her modules, and this is the software application and software fork of it. So I will be using it, and there's this very nice library by Bog Audio with tons and tons and tons of modules, and they're really intelligent. And this is probably the best way to go into synthesis, because it relies on very old school definitions of stochastic synthesis. So, and the last library will be Plateau. And Plateau, like a plateau in French, is another library, and there's one really nice reverb that all the VCV Rack fans use, is the Plateau Valley, and this one is, it's a plate reverb, but it really sounds nice. So let's go on. Let me show you VCV Rack. So this is VCV Rack. This is the first patch that I'm going to show. VCV Rack actually is very simple environments where you have a blank page with a few modules, but you can put your own modules inside, the ones you had in your library. So once you've installed your library, take a look on the internet for that part, because this is very well documented. You can put them by right-clicking in your window and just clicking on the library you want. So in this patch, I will be sharing all of this. I installed the TrowaSoft and some native VCV Rack objects, and of course the audio part. So I'll have to explain that later, but I'm going to show you Ableton Live, so you can see my voice right here. And I created groups for the 3 examples that I'll be showing. And this is a track from VCV Rack. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to send data through OSC, and this data through OSC comes from Max MSP, will come and arrive inside VCV Rack that would produce a sound, and this will be sent to Ableton Live via audio. So I have to find workarounds for that, and it's a bit of a complication, because the OSC part, as I said, you see, is quite simple. It's just a module you install, and if you're familiar with OSC, you can easily send that through Pure Data or Max, it doesn't matter, or another OSC compatible software, and have VCV Rack produce music. So the other part, the tricky part, is sending the audio from VCV Rack to Ableton Live or your other piece of software. VCV Rack has developed a system to an internal virtual driver that you could use, but is actually deprecated. They chose not to continue developing it because there are other proposals, other pieces of software that are really nice too on your various platforms. I think the best one ever is probably Jack. there's a very famous one called Soundflower that is, I mean, historically speaking, it comes from cycling. And cycling has developed that for a long time. Now Matt Engels has made a fork of that you can find on GitHub easily. So this is the one I'll be using. There is another one called Black Hole. And Rogue Amoeba has developed another one called Loopback. I think that none of those is really satisfying. But I'm still going to use that because the problem we have right now is that Jack is no longer supported on Mac systems. This is probably because of Apple's change in policy, because of in their software policy. This is an ongoing question. It has been an ongoing question for years now. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to send audio from VCV Rack to Ableton Live. But the main issue that I'm having is that I want to send audio from VCV Rack to Ableton Live and back from Ableton Live to VCV Rack. And this is not possible right now. You had to find several workarounds. Just a quick note about that. I've tried for this demonstration to aggregate different sound cards. I have a physical sound card, my Fireface, and a Soundflower running at the same time. I try to aggregate both, but VCV Rack keeps on crashing. I have buffer underruns, some drills and sounds that will get stuck. So using that between Max and Ableton Live, same thing in Reactor. Loopback only instantiates 2 outputs from your software. You cannot have multi-channel outputs. I didn't find a proper solution for that. And Black Hole only has 16 channels. I actually need more. And Soundflower seems to be the best solution because you can have 64 channels at the same time. So this is probably the best way to go. If you wanted to send, 24 channels from one software to the other, Soundflower would be the most reliable. There is one piece of software called Dante Via, where you can aggregate some pieces of hardware with the Dante protocol, which was developed by Odinate. But still, that isn't really satisfying, and VCV Rack crashes. So let's stick to that. So first example I'm going to show is a Max patch. I'm going to show this to you. And in this Max patch, it's a pretty simple Max patch. And I've used some objects that are native to Max that are called beep. And so let's unlock this. And the beep modules you can find in your in Max are actually Eurorack or Eurorack patches. They simulate Eurorack patches. So I'm going to use one of those. It's called Poisson. It's a random generator, a random pulse generator, and 2 LFOs and a lag. So the LFOs here are modulating one another, and the lag is smoothing the signal. All of this is turned through this into OSC, into data, which is bad. That's actually really bad, but that's the best way I found. And all of this is sent to VCV Rack. So the main concern I had is what happens with, is there any jitter between one software and the other? How do I clock them? Because this is when you work with softwares, you often have to think of, how am I going to clock my softwares, especially when you're working with rhythm? When you have a rhythmic proposal and rhythmic music, you need to have something steady. So here in this patch, I'm using Poisson as a clock. It's triggering every 3 seconds. And so let's listen to this. It's this click. So here you hear Max just clicking. And let's see how it works here in VCV Rack. So the TroaSoft module, you need to activate. As you can see, no connection. So let's hit the config button and enable configuration. And I'm receiving in the port 7000 and I'm receiving port 7001 and out to the port 7000. This is the OSC IP. So once I've enabled it, you can see in my scope that there are parameters, something is modulating here, and you can see clicks. This is my click from Max. So now let's listen to the click here. There we go. You can hear a click. So every time Max is clicking, it's arriving here. And I'm going to use this tick, the small trigger here, and I'm going to split this signal to hit a resonator, very famous resonator by Audible Instruments, Mutable Instruments. It's a model resonator, nothing you couldn't achieve with Faust. So this Stéphane is going to talk about that, but there are many ways of making a model resonator. Well, the most famous is this one. I'm using a quantisympathetic string model, and I've also doubled it with an FM operator that has its own VCA in an envelope. So every time the trigger arrives, it is split and goes to my resonator, and then it's also triggered once in a while. It also triggers once in a while the FM operator. To achieve that, I use a Bernoulli gate, and Bernoulli gate is just this is named by Mutable. It's just a It's just a deterministic system where you have 50% chances when to have a signal coming in and out. So when I have a trigger coming in. When your pot here is in the middle, you have 50% chances that it comes out on the left side or on the right side. Here, I want it to be more on the left side. And this is going to my gate input, triggering my FM op. So let's listen to that. So you can hear two things. First, a trigger coming in, something that is, hit. It's strumming my model, and something is modulated. This is the other part. The modulation coming from Max here in OSC is actually modulating this parameter structure. It's a bit tricky because it changes according to the model you're using. This is specific to Mutable Instruments. But here what is happening is the content change. So let's do the FM up here in a while, trigger once in a while. There you heard it. Of course, that tuned in. So one thing, this is just a very simple patch where everything is triggered every 3 seconds. Now I'm going to introduce some chaos to make it more randomatic. And I've also patched the other Bernoulli gate module to the freeze parameter of my plateau reverb. Now let's listen to that. So every time the trigger arrives, there's a probability that it freezes, hence long tails in the sound. Oh, very long tails. Well, the music it produces is really, dramatic, sort of cinematic music. There's a reason for that, and I didn't start the introduction by that, but this is something you should, I think it's implicit, but when you use a piece of software or whatever module you're using, it implicitly implies some type of music. There is no such thing as a piece of software that would achieve everything. Even Max has its own way of thinking, hence its own music implied with it. So every time I use an operator like FM op or a plateau reverb, the way it sounds is, you know, some sort of cinematic way. And the thing is I will produce are always kind of dramatically cinematic, if I may say. It's a little difficult to produce pop music with that. You could, if you had a different definition of mine in pop music. So let's stop this patch. I can hear my reverb is frozen. If I don't unfreeze it, it will continue. One of the nice things about VCV Rack in this case is that what I'm doing here, I could reproduce that with my Euro Rack, because the objects I have here, I have them in my Euro Rack too. The thing with Euro Rack, and this is one of the main debates around Euro Rack or synthesizers, is that if you wanted to start your rack, it's a fair amount of money to invest. I mean, every module is expensive. You couldn't have 100 oscillators just like that. You could achieve that very easily with at least Rack, or if you know how to patch and you know how to program, you could do that with FOSTA without any difficulty. But still, there's one thing really nice about having a physical synthesizers is that you can play. There's the ongoing debate about whether using a synthesizer is better than using a piece of software. Well, I use both of them when I produce music, but when I play with an instrument, it stays an instrument. And instruments are, you know, something that propose music on their own. So once you've built your own synthesizer, well, obviously it's going to narrow down the type of music you can do, of course, but it also helps you produce something. When you write a piece of software, you could do anything, but you have to choose all the time. And so I think it just lacks of creativity. So this is, well, it's my opinion. This is why I have both systems working together. To get rid of all the driver problems with the Eurorack system, I invested, and there are different kind of systems, I invested in the Expert Sleepers modules, and Expert Sleepers actually are physical modules that convert ADAT or USB audio stream into CV gate, making it compatible with your Eurorack modules or your other type of modules. It could be Bushla, it could be Mu systems, but these are really interesting. So it really opens the way you can work with your environment. Let's go on. So I'm going to turn off this first thing and open another one, the second VCV program. So as you can see, there are modules I already used, and this one is a bit different. So what I did here, I created 3 times the same thing. So let's have a look first at, at this. So I have the MIDI CV module resonator again, using a different model. It's a model resonator this time. Another module called segment generator, also by Audible Instruments. So I need to explain what these do. So MIDI CV is a MIDI to control voltage converter inside VCV Rack. It receives any MIDI incoming MIDI, and when turning it into volt per octave, gate, or other parameters, velocity after touch, PWM, W, clock, etc., etc. But the nice thing about that is that I'm using the internal MIDI bus inside your Mac, your Apple systems, you have an internal MIDI bus called IAC bus. You could easily achieve a virtual MIDI bus with any piece of software. If you use a Max patch, it will automatically create a virtual bus. You can see it here from Max 1 and 2. If you're not using Max, you could use another piece of software like MIDI Yoke or MIDI Pipe. There are numerous softwares that could help you create virtual buses, and they're all free and open source. So as you can see, I also have Millimin running, who also creates its own MIDI bus. So it's fairly easy to have a virtual MIDI bus between your softwares. What I'm doing here is I made this patch, this Max patch. Well, I didn't entirely make it. I actually forked an idea. I made this Euclidean sequencer. So Euclidean sequencer, you probably need to have a look on that on the internet for those who are not familiar with the Euclidean sequencers. But what I made here is a polyphonic Euclidean sequencer. This is a very traditional sequencer you'd find in Eurorack systems. Many developers have made those from Make Noise to 2HP to there are numerous sequences you can find in the Eurorack world. So this one is actually a fork by Derek, who is a programmer, a French programmer who made a sequencer called Zeuclide. So I forked it into a polyphonic 10-track sequencer you can find here. I will also give this freely to everyone because it's all open source. This polyphonic sequencer, let me explain how it works. Every track here will generate a note according to a division. This division, called steps, can go up to 64 steps. So from 6 steps to 64. Let's say I will divide it in 45 steps, have 14 divisions, and I'll ask him to make equal divisions in these 45 steps. And there you go. On so every slider here represents an event. This event is, every time this gray thing is going to hit the slider, it will generate the note G3, or another note that you would determine. The height determines the velocity. And I implemented this, a MIDI bus, a virtual MIDI bus, so every track can send to a different destination. So this is kind of handy. You can also shift the position of your event to come. The other thing I implemented, you can see it here. Let me close this window. This part called map is, for those who use Ableton Live, is a mapping system, obviously, but it's going to map the parameters of your sliders to whatever parameter you choose. So here I chose to map the channels 7 and 8 to L time is actually the delay time of a delay plugin. And 8 is going to this parameter here, sends B. It's the amount of auxiliary send that is going to the echo. So I'm going to automatize and the amount of info I'm sending to the delay. So let's have a look again at the sequencer. I'm going to recall the presets. There we go. And sorry, a small cut in sound. Okay. There we go. So every time Euclidean sends a track, these 3 tracks, they will arrive here in these MIDI channels in Ableton Live, and they will be sent to my 3 instances here in Rack. So let's listen to that. Let's close this, open the track, and hit play. So here you see the first one has 32 steps, the second one has 32, but the third one has 34 steps. This is why they're not in sync. So the models I'm using here, the model resonator, are tuned to sound a little bit like bells or metal pieces that are struck. And let's change the presets. Wow, that was a dramatic end. This thing you just heard, I made it for dance. Obviously, you can hear a pulse. There's something rhythmic about that, but it's off. It's really off. Well, that's polyrhythm. It's polyrhythmic stuff. Most of you are familiar with that. There are numerous ways to achieve that, but if you had to write that, I mean, write a score with that, this one is really simplistic, but if I had to show you the complete evolution of it, it's a bit complicated to write. So the nice thing about Euclidean sequencers is that you can write really complex stuff. Sending the MIDI to one place, we could of course sample all the MIDI that is sent by Euclidean and put that in a score, and then just reproduce that with the real live instruments. So this is how we did it for a dance piece I did years ago. And having this complex structures also always evolving with a steady pulse, you can feel the beat, but you can't predict the way it's going to fall. So that's the really interesting part. And the automation is a really nice one. The thing I also implemented and changed that from the original patch by Derek from Euclid is that you can here choose to edit your preset. You can choose your presets to be changed by MIDI. You can shift register every note, and you can listen to incoming MIDI. What does this mean? The preset here, every time I send a MIDI note, let's see that in Ableton. I'm not sure everyone can see that properly. Every time it receives C-2, it will change to preset 1. This will change to preset 2. This one will change, D-2 will change to preset 3, etc., so on and so forth. So you can dynamically change the routing. So I made an off one that initializes everything, meaning that you can write a score like that. I don't know why for this presentation it's clicking, because it's probably because of the audio stream, but in real life it doesn't. So let's listen to that again. Second one. I think you get the idea. let's stop this. There we go. Let's turn this off. Okay. So resonator, this module, you can see it here. I have 3 of those. In real life, that would cost a lot of money. So if you wanted to work with multiple model resonators, VCV rack or another system like a FOST and a Max patch or a PD patch would be the way to go, because in real life, having every module costs 150 or 200 euros, depending on the way it's built. And today we'll see that there are probably cheaper ways to achieve that. So if you wanted to go polyphonic, you would probably use VCV rack. Nice thing about that is that the polyphony system is already implemented inside VCV rack. Have a look at that. There's a Facebook page that documents that very, very well. So let's have a look now at the 3rd example. No, I don't want to save. So here we go again with the same modules. Oops. So in this patch, I am using again a Max patch to generate OSC. I'm using 2 resonators again and plateau as a reverb. But what I try to achieve here is a more complex system where interaction goes from one software, Max goes to VCV rack. VCV rack makes the audio part, and the audio part is streamed to Ableton Live, just as a mixer. And so you're receiving this through the audio channel. But this part is the interesting one. This thing called Aeolian, dBiz. dBiz is a sequencer, is an XY sequencer. So this is a traditional sequencer you would find in your rack modules. Every time a trigger comes in here, it will shift and play the note on the left. Every time it comes here, it will shift the note and play on the right. And this one, it will shift and play the note that's upwards, and this one, it will shift and play the note that's downwards. So we don't know which one of these 4 is going to receive a signal. So first things first, let's turn on the configuration, enable OSC. Now it's receiving, it's ready to go. Let's open the Max patch corresponding to that. Close this one, and there we go. What I did here is I actually programmed a system that will detect an amplitude. Every time an amplitude is reached, it will trigger something and then randomly distribute to the 4 outputs that go to VCV rack. So I didn't really program this thing. I forked this onset detection that you can find in your package manager under the US Upshot library. It's a really handy library. It's all Max MSP, so it's a very simple patch, but it's really handy for that. So I'm using here a drum loop, this famous drum loop that all Max users know. Let's listen to that, if it's all open. There you go. Everyone knows this one. Let's turn it off, turn down the volume. And let's have a look what is happening here in rack. Every time it sends something. I'm going to turn the volume off so you can see that Max is banging every time it reaches an amplitude, a threshold. And there it goes. You can see that the yellow button is changing from one pot to the other. Now, what if I wanted this to be in sync with some video? Nice thing about OSC is that I can send that to Millimine too. Millimine is a software that generates video. So here you can see I have found some images on the internet, and it shifts every time, not every time. I'll explain why. It shifts in sync when there's a bang coming. And now let's listen to the audio part. So as you can hear, let's turn this off. You hear it's always the same notes. Why is it? Because it's always shifting inside this reservoir of notes that are tuned to according to a certain scale. And this is the interesting part, where every threshold is just going to choose randomly inside a reservoir, hence making some melodic things. So this is also a thing I used in dance, where you need to have a certain melodic structure. You don't need to, but we chose to. So let's have a look at the max patch again. Turn off the drum loop. What if I used a pulse generator again? This is the other part. And I'm going to use the pulse generator again, but this time I'm going to hook up 4 of those. And this pulse generator, oh, by the way, this pulse generator isn't Max stuff. It actually comes from SoundHack, and the developer who developed that in the Beep library, if you have a look at the help file, he gives every information. It's just a basic random and chaotic piece of program he did on SoundHack. So SoundHack, sorry, Super Collider. It's Super Collider stuff ported to Max. I think it's even Gen. So this Poisson thing, pulse generator, is I turned off the chaos, and I looped the output of to 3 other instances of Poisson. This means that this is the master clock, and the 3 others are actually tuned to be subdivisions in time. I'm still doing polyphonic polyrhythm here. So let's have a look at that and change to my pulse generator system. So you can see it flashing here. And let's listen to that. Like a illumine. Well, if we're here that I use trigger audio and video, it's kind of related to a sound. You could, of course, put an input here and have the onset detection detects incoming signal from an instrument, and then make it generate sound inside VCV rack and go to Millimin at the same time. This is how when I would set up my system. Set up a system to have a complex audio and video stream at the same time. You could write a piece out of that. But what I did here with a steady pulse sounds a bit like minimalistic music, I'd say. Minimalistic music like some Reich or music, but there's no repetition inside. The only thing that is repeated is the harmonic scale. So let's continue. So I'm turning off the pulse. As I said, you can have a microphone coming in. What if this microphone was my voice? Let's see if it works. I have an input here, and I've hooked it up to my onset detection. So now it should be triggering. Is it? Yes, it's working. And you can lower the detection. As you can see, every time my voice reaches the threshold, it will trigger a note here and an image. The images are not always triggered. There's a reason for that. This object here is a shift register. You can find a sequential switch, sorry. You will find that in VCV Rack. It actually switches the inputs to the output. So if there's no sound, if there's no input, then there's silence. This is a way to avoid a continuous stream of audio running all the time. This is one of the major issues you would have with synthesizers turned on. They keep on generating sound. So this is my way of creating silence. There are others, but this one is nice. And there we go. So this is probably I'd say the neatest way I found to hook up some complex systems between different softwares would be OSC, even though I still believe that OSC has its own issues and it's not the best way to work. What I'm really missing now is a real programmable patch bay, something that you would choose between different softwares. Say I have a software that has 16 outputs, another that has 4, and have them all being merged inside a piece of software, but I could choose to split them, merge them, and send them to other softwares. This would be really nice and convenient. This is what Jack does in a way, but because Jack can't add signals together. It can only split them. But what would be nice is sort of mixer, patch bay. In the Eurorack world, we would call that a unity mixer or a multiplier. Basically, these are just the systems that we would use. But right now, there is no steady way to make that. I'm not sure if you guys or guys and girls have a way to achieve that. I found several workarounds, but they don't seem to fit the purposes we're needing. The MIDI system is really going to be here for a long time, as I said, particularly since Ableton has implemented that inside Live 11, and this piece of DAW is a very famous one, so lots of people use it. I'm not sure it's a good thing, but things are going to change accordingly. These past 15 years, lots of things have changed in the audio domain. So why not dream of a huge control voltage, let's not call that control voltage, but audio stream that we could reroute wherever we wanted to. As we said, it's easily mappable to a piece of hardware like Expert Sleepers or another piece of hardware. You could easily turn that into a control for external gear. The tricky part about that is it's always a one-to-one signal when you send CV. So, but it makes it easier to understand. So I would go CV all the way if I could inside my softwares as well. So I think I'm a bit in advance with the timing. I don't know if Jan is back there. Probably. Yeah. Well, I must admit that most of the time it's when you program your things, you try to make something that you know very well, because there's one thing on stage is a certain situation, and producing music for others or for yourself to make a tape music is completely different. So on stage, why is it different? Because there's an audience. When there's an audience, you always lose your you lose your concentration. I mean, 90% of my concentration just vanishes. So I need to have a piece of software and gear that I know well. This is why it's interesting to have a synthesizers, because I can rely on it. I know what's happening here. I make very little mistakes with it. As if I was programming, I can do lots of mistakes. And let's say that the huge amount of possibilities. Yeah, as you probably saw when I right-clicked on VCV Rack, I have like thousands of modules. How can I choose? I have to experiment with them. So it's a complete different thing. Doing things live, you need to rely on something you know, and because your goal is not to explore, your goal is to make music live for people. So sometimes it's interesting, but the nice thing about Eurorack, or I mean an instrument, is a hazard. I mean, chance that something new can occur and you can react to it, and you know how to react with it. If you do that with the software, if you're experimenting, sometimes it goes wild and you don't know how to get out of it. You're just stuck with it and you need to figure a way. Sometimes it crashes also. That's hopefully for this demonstration, nothing crashed, but I had numerous crashes trying to build up this presentation, and even having the audio stream go to you guys with four different softwares running at the same time. I can tell you my CPU is really peaking right now. It's so this means I can't, with a brand new MacBook, I can't really rely on it. So nice thing is having another piece of instrument working on that side, producing music. I would get rid of VC Rack and do that with my Euro Rack. That will sort of clear my mind and be really assured that I have something running, you know. Because for you guys who are familiar with the Max MSP world and programming, as I've been doing this for the past 20 years now, we've had so many crashes live with the audience that is not, I mean, that is, we can't do that anymore. It's done. We have to stop that. That is not music. We have to find a way to be sure that something musical is producing. What I mean, that's my opinion. I read music for people, and I do music. I don't do research. Research is one part when you work, but at a certain point, you need to have a steady and solid programming stuff so you can present it. Even though it's still experimental, sometimes you have pieces where you 90% experimental stuff and crashes. I had, unfortunately, numerous experiences with that. And you always have the feeling of it's a failure in a way. I'm not sure if I'm clear for that, but I'm so the protocols here. I sort of I think everything relies on that, because the software, you know them, but the way you communicate with them is the tricky part, and this is the part that crashes all the time. Not to mention if you had a huge stream of OSC running from sensors to your patches, it almost always overloads your machine. This is a very famous thing. So you need to narrow this down. It's a very refined thing to find, I think. I see that. We have to switch to Rust to avoid part of the crashes, says Stefan. Yes, we do. The funny thing I have to share with you guys, because for this presentation, I was thinking of showing you something I've been trying to work on. I'm not the only one, but I generated with Euclidean, as you saw, some notes that are sent to VCV rack. What I did is I recorded the notes, the control voltages, frequencies, and the gates. I recorded them into an audio, a buffer. And this audio buffer, I just use that and try to use that as a new control source. I've put that in one of my modules called Morphogene, and the Morphogene, I try to use that to remote other pieces of my modules. The thing is that with the 1 volt per octave convention in the Eurorack world, we have a problem. It doesn't, the audio isn't, you know, it will clip when you're trying to use control voltage for pitch. What happens is that the pitch, when it reaches the volts above 1, it will clip. So, but you need 5 volts to control pitch. I'm not sure if I'm clear right now. The other guys are probably better on that part than me. But so I tried that on a cassette player. I recorded control voltage and gates on an analog cassette player. And that is so much fun because you can, let's say you record a loop with a sequence, have it turn it around. What if you could slow this down and you could make it faster or slower? You would, of course, everything would detune and you would slow down the speed of your sequence. And this is what I did. And it's so much fun to do. I tried to do that with the Morphogene, but in the digital world, it doesn't work at all. You had to oversample everything. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but
so apparently I'm not here on the YouTube stream. Sorry for that. There are some questions, Max, for you on the. Okay.
Have you found ways to get VCV rack out of software and into hardware with something like an Arduino or Raspberry Pi? Oh, that's a very interesting. So I haven't found pieces. I haven't found solutions for that. But if you continue, if you keep on, Brandon, if you keep on looking at the stream to today, I think I don't know when they are, when we'll see that afterwards. Sorry, just. There we go. Afterwards, we're going to see that on a Teensy, if I'm correct, right? So Teensy is probably a solution. On a Raspberry Pi, that would be kind of easy because you could, you know, easily make a PD patch, a pure data patch, and yeah, Roland is going to speak about the Teensy world, so he's going to show you how to program that on an even simpler piece of hardware. But with the Raspberry Pi, you could do that with pure data. The other tricky part would have to need to have a proper ADDA converter, and I'm not sure the Raspberry Pi is really good with that thing. I don't have much experience with that. I think recent audio interfaces let you use audio outputs as CV outputs, and not all of them. Unfortunately, most audio outputs actually filter out CV because control voltage is bad for a sound engineer. As a sound engineer, I can tell you that. We usually filter that out because it just blows your PA. It's very dangerous stuff. It's continuous signal is the worst thing you can have. And a lot of modules exist as hardware modules, of course. Yeah, that's right. Roland will speak about that. I mean, he's the guy for that question. No, the reason I use expert sleepers is pretty simple. Actually, I have to be honest with you guys. Most of the time when I go on a gig, I have my Fireface 802 hooked up to an ADAT system, and the secondary ports of the ADATs on the Fireface, because there are 2 inputs and 2 outputs, secondary port is used for the modular. So the ADAT is completely DC compatible. So I have my module that's completely integrated with absolutely no delay between Max MSP, Ableton Live, or whatever I'm using. and the mixer for the PAs. So this is why I'm using expert snippers, and the converters are really good quality converters, because it's also, I also use them as input and output, not only for control but also for sound. If I have a microphone running in my modular, I could, you know, send that to my computer without using my Fireface. So it's really handy for that part, though it's kind of expensive though.
Okay, so thank you very much, Max. I don't know if we can
Thanks
applaud you, but I can try.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
And